My wife asked for a break to find herself. Then I realized she cheated with a man online. So, I had a plan that turned her world upside down. I, a 34-year-old male, will recount how my once solid marriage unraveled into a complete disaster. Let me start by telling you a bit about who I am. I grew up in a hard-working, blue-collar household in the heart of the Midwest. My father spent over 3 decades working at the same factory, coming home each evening with oil-stained hands and the heavy scent of machinery clinging to his clothes. He instilled in me a simple but powerful belief. A man's integrity and dedication to his work are the most valuable things he can offer the world. My mother, on the other hand, managed our bustling home, raising 4 kids on a shoestring budget, stretching every dollar with coupons and planning every meal down to the ounce. We were never wealthy, but we never went without essentials. Luxuries were rare treasures. Something as simple as takeout or a movie night felt like a celebration. I wasn't a standout student by any means, but I made up for that with pure effort. Sports were where I really thrived, especially football and wrestling. They taught me resilience and gave me a sense of direction. Thanks to my athletic performance, I earned a partial scholarship to a state college, but after 2 years, I left school when the construction company I'd worked for during summer breaks offered me a full-time position with solid pay. My parents were disappointed, of course. They hoped I'd be the first in our family to graduate from college. But at just 21, I was making more than most of my peers who stayed the course. I dove headfirst into construction, working brutal hours and absorbing every bit of knowledge I could. By the time I was 26, I'd climbed the ranks to become a site manager. Then at 29, I took a leap of faith and launched my own contracting firm. The first year was a nightmare of stress and sacrifice. I lived off instant noodles and barely slept. But I refused to give up. By the 3rd year, my business had stabilized. I had 6 employees and enough projects booked out 6 months ahead. I carved this life from pure grit and persistence. 8 years ago, at a friend's backyard barbecue hosted by my buddy Dave, I met Jessica. She had this magnetic, confident energy and worked as a marketing coordinator for a startup in the tech sector. Her piercing green eyes lit up whenever she spoke about her career goals, and she radiated the same kind of ambition that had driven me for years. We clicked instantly. It felt like 2 puzzle pieces snapping together. She admired that I'd built a company from scratch without a college degree, calling it a kind of intelligence that was more impressive than any diploma. After 3 years of dating, we got married in an intimate ceremony with about 50 guests. Jessica's idea, though not long after she lamented that it wasn't Instagram-worthy enough. Those first few months of marriage felt like a dream. After long workdays, we'd come home and cook side by side, binge-watch shows, and couldn't seem to keep our hands off each other. We talked deep into the night about building something lasting, something real. 2 years into our marriage, Jessica got pregnant with our daughter Lily. It wasn't part of a strict plan, but we embraced the news with open arms. Jessica had always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, at least until our kids started school. And with the income I was bringing in, we were able to live comfortably in a cozy 3-bedroom house I'd bought before we tied the knot, using the profits from a weekend house flip, a detail that will matter later. So, I supported her decision to step back from her career. Her pregnancy was tough. Non-stop nausea, swollen feet, and mood swings. I stepped up in every way I could. I took over the cooking, brought in a cleaning service bi-weekly, and made late-night runs for her wild cravings, things like chocolate ice cream drenched in pickle juice. I even redesigned the 2nd bedroom into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow just as she wanted, and putting together all the baby furniture myself. When Lily was finally born, Jessica was hit hard by postpartum struggles. I understood that it was a hormonal roller coaster and did everything within my power to ease the burden. I took 3 full weeks off from work, a huge strain on a small business owner like myself, but family had to come first. I did diaper changes, night feedings, and somehow kept my company from falling apart at the seams. Once I went back to work, I hired a part-time helper to assist Jessica at home, giving her time to rest and recover. I also started taking on more clients and more demanding jobs. Some days I was on site for 12 hours straight, even on weekends, just to maintain the lifestyle Jessica seemed to crave. She was constantly on social media, comparing our life to her college friends' posts, lavish vacations, designer baby gear, weekend getaways. Still, I tried to give her everything. I took on complex, high-paying projects like custom home builds. We had a comfortable life, a nice house in a good neighborhood, 2 dependable cars, and enough financial breathing room that Jessica could buy whatever she or Lily needed without batting an eye. I believed we were building something lasting. I truly thought we were united in that vision. But reality came crashing down on a cold Tuesday in November. I remember it vividly. Our first snowfall of the season had blanketed everything, and I spent the early morning hours ensuring our newly poured foundation was protected from freezing. Then I had to fix a massive screw-up with a supplier who delivered the wrong light fixtures for the Peterson job. By the time I got home, I'd been on my feet since 5 o'clock a.m., and it was already past 7 o'clock in the evening. I walked into our house, boots covered in dried mud and concrete dust. Jessica was at the kitchen island, face buried in her phone, barely glancing at me. Lily, our sweet 15-month-old daughter with Jessica's vibrant eyes and my dark hair, sat strapped in her high chair, surrounded by half-eaten Cheerios. She looked like she'd been stuck there for hours. I gave a tired smile and greeted them. "Hey, babe. Sorry, I'm late. The supplier screwed up again," I said while reaching for Lily, who squealed in delight and reached back with sticky hands. Jessica didn't even look up. She just said flatly, "I need a break to find myself again." I stood there, momentarily frozen, her words echoing louder than any job-site machinery ever had. I looked around our kitchen, our home, a place we'd built together, now feeling unfamiliar and cold. My arms wrapped around Lily, her giggle a small comfort in that heavy moment, but my heart thudded with the weight of confusion and dread. Jessica finally looked up, her eyes not angry, not sad, just distant, like I was someone she used to know, like I was a stranger in my own home. She talked vaguely about needing time to rediscover who she was outside of being a wife and mother, about feeling lost in the routine, about how she used to dream bigger. I listened, trying to make sense of the words spilling out of her mouth. Every sentence felt like a quiet demolition of the life we'd built. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't said anything sooner. Why hadn't she leaned on me the way I had always tried to lean into us? But the words caught in my throat. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I was too stunned to argue. And in that silence, something shifted, irreversibly. Jessica finally looked up from her phone and interrupted me mid-sentence. "Being a mom has stolen my identity," she said flatly. I stood there, still in my muddy work boots, holding our giggling daughter, who was now tugging at my beard with sticky fingers. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "A break, like a vacation? You know, I can take some time off next month, after the Miller project wraps up. Maybe we can go somewhere, just the two of us?" She shook her head. "No, Mike, a break from us. I'm not happy anymore. You don't meet my emotional needs. I feel like I'm just Mike's wife or Lily's mom now. I need space to figure out who I am." This is coming from the woman who hadn't worked a single day in the past 2 years, the woman who got weekly spa treatments on my tab, who had a cleaning service come in twice a month, also paid for by me. She even had a mother's helper come in 3 days a week to give her extra support while I was busting my back for 60 to 70 hours each week, trying to give her the very life she said she wanted. And now, somehow, I was the one making her unhappy? Is there someone else? The question left my lips before I could stop it. Her eyes darted to her phone for the briefest second, and that flicker was all the answer I needed. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, standing up abruptly. "This toxic masculinity, where you assume I must be cheating just because I need space, is exactly the problem. This is why I feel suffocated. You don't understand emotional labor or the mental load of being a mother." I took a long breath and bounced Lily gently on my hip. She was beginning to sense the tension rising in the room. "Okay," I said calmly. "Let's talk about this. What does a break look like to you? Where would you go? And what about Lily?" Jessica rolled her eyes like I was completely missing the point. "I don't know yet, Mike. That's why I need space to think. God, you always need everything spelled out, like a contract." I didn't push it that night. Instead, I focused on Lily. I cleaned her up, fed her a proper dinner, since it looked like all she had for dinner were dry Cheerios, gave her a warm bath, and tucked her into bed with her favorite 3 bedtime stories. By the time I came back downstairs, Jessica was glued to some mindless reality TV show and didn't even acknowledge me. I quietly grabbed a soda from the fridge and crashed in the guest room, my heart heavy and my instincts screaming that something just wasn't right. But 8 years of building a life with someone makes you want to believe the best in them. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been too consumed with work and not focused enough on the emotional side of our relationship. I fell asleep trying to figure out how to fix what I thought was a small crack, unaware that the whole foundation had already crumbled. The following 2 days passed in a foggy, tension-filled silence. Jessica suddenly claimed she was too exhausted to care for Lily in the mornings, so I started getting up even earlier to get her dressed, fed, and ready for the day. I began dropping her off at my mom's before heading to work. My mother was more than happy to watch her granddaughter and gave me the support I didn't realize I needed. Every evening when I returned home, Jessica was either heading out for a girls' night or disappearing for some vague self-care activity. Her distance became undeniable. On the third day, I got a message during lunch from my friend Ryan. "Dude, call me ASAP, it's about Jess." I stepped away from the construction site and called him from my truck. Ryan sounded uneasy. "Look, man, I didn't want to get involved, but this isn't sitting right with me." He explained that his girlfriend Tara was in some kind of online gaming role-play group on Discord with Jessica. "She's been watching Jess overshare about your marriage for weeks now," he said. My stomach turned to ice. "What kind of oversharing?" I asked. "She's been ranting about how emotionally unavailable you are, how you're obsessed with providing instead of connecting. Says you guys haven't had a real conversation in months." I clenched the steering wheel, remembering the countless times I'd tried to start conversations about Lily's milestones, our future plans, or even just how her day had gone, only to get distracted by grunts or one-word replies while she stared at her screen. "There's this guy in the group goes by Ethan," Ryan continued. "Tara says Jess has been private messaging him all the time, like staying up until 3:00 a.m., chatting with him. That would explain the new pattern of Jessica being too exhausted to function in the mornings." "Has Tara seen any of their private messages?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "Not all of them, but enough. Jess was bragging in the group chat yesterday about how she told you she needed a break and how you just stood there like a robot with no emotions. She said this Ethan guy listens to her. Really listens." I thanked Ryan and sat in my truck for 20 straight minutes, staring blankly through the windshield. Suddenly everything started to make sense. The sudden call for space, the endless girls' nights that seemed more and more fictitious, the non-stop texting. Something inside me snapped. That night, while Jessica was in the shower, her new hour-long showers where she always brought her phone into the bathroom, I did something I never imagined I'd do. Her laptop was left open on the kitchen table. I checked her Discord. What I found made me physically nauseous. She and this Ethan guy had been exchanging explicit messages, complete with photos I had no idea she'd ever taken. They were sharing private fantasies, flirtatious banter, and personal confessions that tore into the very fabric of our marriage. She told him how intellectually stimulating he was compared to me, just a construction guy, in her words, as if the business I'd built from scratch was worthless. She said she felt seen and understood by him in ways she never had with me, despite our years of shared memories, hardships, and dreams. And then there were the critiques of our sex life. Harsh, cruel exaggerations that completely erased all the times I'd tried to connect with her emotionally, only to be brushed off or ignored. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, barely able to breathe. Every word, every message, every emoji felt like a dagger. I wasn't just betrayed. I was being mocked, ridiculed, rewritten into some cold, emotionally stunted stereotype in a story she was telling to feel better about what she was doing. All the sacrifices, the hours, the exhaustion, it all meant nothing in that chat window. She had rewritten our entire life into a justification for her betrayal. Betrayed herself. Betrayed herself. I shut the laptop slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I could hear the water still running upstairs, Jessica probably smiling at her screen in the foggy bathroom, thinking I was still clueless. But I wasn't. Not anymore. My world had just changed forever. And in that silence, a storm was beginning to form. Not of rage, but of resolve. She shared intimate details about my body and insecurities, things I had confided in her over the years, of vulnerability and trust. The worst part? From everything I could gather, this guy wasn't even impressive. He was unemployed, living in his mom's basement somewhere in Oregon, and at 29 had never even held down a real relationship. But to Jessica, he was a free spirit who got her on a soul-deep level. She swooned over his cringe-worthy poetry like he was some undiscovered literary genius. And it wasn't just emotional cheating anymore. They were already making plans for her to visit him. They were openly discussing how much child support and alimony she could squeeze out of me, confidently assuming it would be enough for them to start a life together. There were even mentions of how Lily would adapt to the move once everything settles down. I took screenshots of everything, every explicit message, every degrading remark, and emailed them to myself. Then I closed the laptop and returned it to the same angle she had left it. I felt utterly hollow, like someone had gouged out my insides with a rusted spoon. And Jessica came out of the bathroom in her robe, phone glued to her hand. I couldn't hold back anymore. "So, who's Ethan?" I asked, my voice calm but razor sharp. Her face transformed rapidly. Shock, fear, anger, calculation, and finally, righteous indignation. "You went through my private conversations?" she shrieked, clutching her phone like I was about to wrestle it from her. "Your laptop was wide open, Jess. Hardly Fort Knox," I said, keeping my tone measured. "Answer the question. Who is Ethan, and why are you planning to take my daughter across the country to live with him?" "It's not like that," she fired back. "He's just a friend, someone who actually listens to me. Unlike you, if you were meeting my emotional needs, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. This is your fault." I reminded her who paid for that phone she was holding, the internet she used to message this friend, and the roof over her head. All of it. I'd worked myself into exhaustion to fund a lifestyle that gave her time and space, and she used it to chat up some stranger in a basement. "Oh, so now you're going to financially abuse me?" she shot back. "Throw money in my face? This is why I need someone like Ethan. He values me for who I am, not as a trophy wife." I nearly laughed out loud. Trophy wife? She hadn't put on makeup in over a year, hadn't made an effort for me in longer. Meanwhile, I was lucky to get a grunt when I walked in the door after working a 12-hour day in the freezing cold or blazing heat. "I'm going to ask you one last time," I said, barely keeping the anger out of my voice. "Are you having an affair with this guy, emotional or otherwise?" "You can't have an affair with someone you've never met in person," she replied condescendingly, like she was educating a child. "And even if I was, it would be because you drove me to it, with your emotional neglect." That was all I needed to hear. She wasn't denying it, she was rationalizing it, shifting the blame squarely onto me. "I'm sleeping in the guest room until we figure this out," I said, already turning away. "Fine, run away from the conversation just like you always do," she yelled after me. "This is why our marriage is falling apart." I didn't answer. I shut the guest room door, lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every red flag from the last few months. Had I truly been that disconnected? Or was she rewriting the narrative to justify what she was doing? What I knew for sure was this: I wasn't going to be played for a fool. If Jessica wanted to explore life with Shakespeare the basement dweller, she could have it, but not on her terms. The next morning at 4:30 a.m., while Jessica was still asleep, I dressed quietly, packed up Lily and took her to my mom's. I explained just enough for her to understand that the situation was serious. As always, my mom was a rock. She agreed to watch Lily for the day, and didn't push me for details I wasn't ready to share. Instead of heading to the job site, I went to my office and made 3 calls. One to Dave, my lawyer buddy who handles all my business contracts. One to my bank to set up a financial review, and one to a security company a client had recommended. I was done being caught off guard. Dave didn't sugarcoat it. "Mike, you need to protect yourself and your daughter. Jessica's already proven she's willing to prioritize her own wants over Lily's well-being." He advised me to gather documentation, screenshots of her messages with Ethan, proof of the money I've spent supporting her lifestyle, and a log of how much parenting I've done compared to her. "Courts usually lean toward the mother," he warned, "but if you can demonstrate she's uninvolved and you're the consistent, stable parent, even while working full-time, you stand a real shot at primary custody." The security company came out the next morning. I had cameras installed in all the common areas of the house, completely legal since I owned the property. When I told Jessica they were being added for security, she rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. She was too busy texting. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the guest room, staring into the shadows as thoughts raced through my head like a freight train with no brakes. The betrayal wasn't just about the messages or the inappropriate photos. It was the erosion of everything we had built together. 8 years of memories, laughter, shared goals and sacrifices, reduced to cheap texts and misguided poetry with a man who didn't even have a job. I thought about Lily, her little laugh, the way she gripped my finger with her tiny hand. She was the reason I couldn't fall apart. I needed to be strategic, focused and strong, not for me, but for her. She deserved stability, not to be carted off across the country by a mother who viewed responsibility as a burden and escape as freedom. The next morning, I took time to reflect before the chaos could begin. I opened a fresh document and started compiling everything: the date and timestamps from the Discord messages, a financial ledger showing all the expenses I had covered, notes about Jessica's recent absences, and how often I was the one preparing meals, doing bedtime, and managing tantrums. Every detail was relevant. I also began backing up our financial records, transferring certain savings into accounts solely under my name, still jointly accessible by law, but requiring both signatures for withdrawal. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was protecting our daughter's future. If Jessica decided to drain our accounts to chase a fantasy with a man-child in Oregon, she wasn't going to do it with Lily's college fund. Meanwhile, Jessica remained oblivious, still glued to her phone, still taking self-care baths while I handled the house. Occasionally, she'd try to guilt-trip me for being distant, completely ignoring the chasm she had carved into our marriage. I kept my responses short, factual, and polite. I wasn't going to fight. I was preparing for a war she didn't even realize had started. At the bank, I opened a separate account and started moving money into it. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to give me a cushion if things unraveled fast. I also requested a detailed record of our financial activity over the past year. The numbers painted a clear picture. Thousands of dollars poured into Jessica's self-discovery, spa days, subscription boxes, virtual therapy sessions, and online coaching with people who had no credentials beyond a flashy Instagram bio. Next, I trimmed back my work schedule. Instead of the usual 12-hour days, I scaled down to 9 or 10, delegating more to Tim, my trusted foreman. This gave me more quality time with Lily, and allowed me to document just how involved I was in her life, despite working full-time. I took her to every doctor appointment Jessica had either missed or forgotten twice already. I handled grocery shopping because the fridge was mysteriously empty too often. I began keeping detailed notes of Jessica's daily habits, including the times she got out of bed, how much time she spent glued to her phone, and how frequently she engaged with our daughter. Jessica was so absorbed in her digital fantasy world, she didn't even notice the changes. She'd sit on FaceTime with Ethan in the middle of the living room, barely glancing up when Lily toddled over, saying, "Mama." The most Lily got was a distracted pat on the head before being redirected to her toys. One night, I overheard Jessica whisper to Ethan, "Once I figure out the logistics, I can come visit you. Mike is so clueless he thinks this break is temporary. He's still sleeping in the guest room like a good little boy." That was the moment I accepted this wasn't salvageable. I wasn't going to be her safety net or her ATM while she auditioned her future with some basement-dwelling poet. I consulted with 3 different divorce attorneys before settling on Sarah, a sharp and fearless lawyer who specialized in fathers' rights. She reviewed my documentation and nodded in approval. "You've done your homework, Mike. Most guys wait until the damage is done. Let's build a case that protects both you and Lily." To keep up appearances, I began attending therapy, not because I believed it would save the marriage, but because I needed official documentation that I was making an effort. That, and the session, actually helped me stay grounded while navigating the emotional storm of watching my wife throw our life away for an illusion. Dr. Chen, my therapist, didn't sugarcoat things. "Mike, Jessica is deep in what we call the affair fog. She's rewriting your history, compartmentalizing her role as a mother to chase a new emotional high, and shifting blame to justify her betrayal." "What do I do?" I asked him during one painful session. "Keep documenting, avoid arguments, prepare for the reality that she may never come out of this fog." It was a brutal truth, but one I was already starting to accept. The woman I thought I married might never have existed. Not really. Or maybe she had changed so gradually that I failed to notice until she became a stranger, wearing my wife's face. As weeks passed, Jessica's behavior worsened. Her tone grew sharper, her demands more absurd. The more detached she became, the more entitled she acted. One Sunday, my only full day off, she handed me a list of chores. "I'm emotionally drained," she explained. "My life coach says I need to prioritize self-care." The same coach I'd seen charging $200 0 cents per hour on our credit card bill. She continued, "As the emotionally unavailable male partner, you should be stepping up more around here." I looked at the list: mowing the lawn, fixing the garage door, cleaning gutters, doing all the laundry including her delicate items, and meal prepping her lunches for the week. Nothing about Lily. Not even a mention. I handed the list back. "I'll handle my half of the parenting and home responsibilities, like I always have, but I'm not your personal servant." She exploded. "You don't understand the mental load of being a mother. You can't possibly get it because of your male privilege." Meanwhile, Lily was happily playing in the playpen I had set up after making her breakfast that morning. I replied calmly, "Jessica, I take Lily to all her appointments. I do most of the shopping. I cook more than you, and I still work 50 hours a week. What exactly is so mentally exhausting for you?" "You just don't get it," she screamed, before storming off to, no surprise, video chat with Ethan. The irony was brutal. Our security footage showed Jessica spent maybe 2 or 3 hours a day actually engaging with Lily. The rest was screen time. Either Jessica glued to her phone, or Lily zoned out with a tablet. The cameras never lied. Jessica began criticizing everything about me. How I played with Lily. Too rough, she claimed, when I tossed our daughter in the air and made her laugh. My job? It's just construction, not rocket science. Despite the fact that my just construction business bankrolled our entire life. My gym routine? So vain, she'd scoff, even though I was already shouldering most of the household load. It stung, especially because the same qualities she now weaponized against me, my discipline, my work ethic, my strength, were the exact things she once said made her fall in love. Now those same traits were painted as flaws, obstacles to her self-actualization. I also began journaling. Every night after Lily went to sleep, I'd take a few moments to jot down not just what had happened that day, but how I felt. It wasn't just for court or strategy. It became a quiet place for me to pour my confusion, hurt, and rage into words that wouldn't come out otherwise. Writing helped me process the quiet grief of losing a person who still shared my home, but not my loyalty. Tim, my foreman, noticed the shift in me. "You all right, boss?" he asked one afternoon. I gave him a half smile and nodded. He didn't press, but he started taking on more of the project load without being asked, which gave me even more time with Lily. That's the thing about people who respect you. They step up when it matters. Lily thrived with the new routine. Her language skills improved, her mood stabilized, and she started asking for dada more than mama. I documented all of it. Pictures, videos, even texts from my mom, complimenting how happy Lily seemed lately. It wasn't meant to be used as ammo. It was a record of reality. Proof that I was already acting as the primary parent long before lawyers got involved. Jessica remained oblivious to the shifting tide. She was too enchanted by her fantasy with Ethan, too convinced of her victimhood to see the structure I was quietly building around her chaos. She believed she held all the cards, until the moment I was ready to play mine. I also started gathering testimonials, from neighbors who'd seen me regularly walking Lily, from friends who'd noticed how present I was at every family function, even from daycare workers who remembered how often Jessica forgot to pack essentials. These weren't dramatic pieces of evidence, but they added to the portrait I was painting, of a father doing everything in his power to protect his child, while the mother retreated into a fantasy. More importantly, I kept my cool. No yelling matches, no accusations. Every word from me was measured, intentional, and documented, because when the time came, I wanted it crystal clear who had been building a life, and who had been running from it. One day, Jessica left a notebook open on the kitchen counter while she was in the bathroom. I'm not proud that I looked, but after everything that had unfolded, I didn't feel guilty either. It was part of some journaling assignment her life coach had given her, a self-reflection exercise. On one side of the page, she'd listed her ideal partner traits. On the other hand, her current reality. Under ideal partner, she had written, intellectually stimulating, creative and sensitive, understands my emotional needs without me having to explain, prioritizes quality time over material things, sees me as an equal, not just a mother or wife, spiritual connection. Under current reality, meaning me, she had scribbled, only talks about work and practical matters, no creative hobbies, emotionally unavailable, doesn't understand deeper needs, thinks providing financially is enough, sees me as just the mother of his child, no spiritual dimension. I stared at the words, stunned. In what reality was I the man she was describing? I'd taken up woodworking years ago. Our dining table, the bookshelves, and even Lily's crib had come from my hands. I had tried to talk about things beyond work many times, art, travel, memories, but I'd get grunts or monosyllabic responses while she stared at her phone. I used to plan spontaneous date nights until she started canceling for me time. That's when it hit me. Jessica had created a fictional version of me, a caricature, to justify what she was doing. In her mind, I wasn't a partner anymore. I was the villain in her story, the obstacle standing between her and some imaginary happiness. She came out of the bathroom and saw me holding her notebook. Seriously? Now you're invading my private thoughts? This is exactly why I'm miserable. You have no respect for boundaries, she snapped. Respect goes both ways, Jess, I said quietly. You've turned me into some emotionless robot in your head. But that's not who I am. That's just the story you're telling yourself to feel better about betraying me. You don't know what I'm feeling. You never have, she hissed before storming upstairs. I didn't chase after her. There was no use arguing with someone rewriting history to fit a narrative. I took Lily to the park instead. Watching her giggle on the swing was the only thing that felt real anymore. That night, Jessica didn't come home until after 11. She claimed she was with friends, but the location she still had shared on our phones showed her parked at a Starbucks for over 4 hours. I didn't need to ask what she was doing. She didn't ask about Lily, didn't check if she'd eaten, if she was okay, if she'd slept well. She walked straight to the shower with her phone, the same as always. About 4 weeks into her break, I came home from the gym to see a $600 0 cents clothing order charged to our joint card. "I deserve to feel good about myself," she said when I questioned it. "Your constant criticism is why I needed this break." I was too exhausted to argue. I just nodded, went upstairs and spent time with Lily, who was overjoyed to show me she could now stack her blocks higher than her little head. That night, Jessica left her laptop open while she bathed. A message popped up from Ethan. I didn't plan to look, but I did. They were mocking me. She called me desperate and pathetic for still trying to fix things, by which she meant keeping our home afloat and caring for our child. She laughed about me going to therapy. "It's hilarious that he thinks he can change," she wrote. "He's so clueless." Then I saw this. "Once I figure out child support and alimony, I can come see you. His business did well last year, so I should get a nice payout. I've been researching. Oregon law favors mothers. I'll file once I'm there with Lily. He'll have to pay for us to live near you." I didn't snap, not with anger, but I reached a moment of pure, quiet clarity. I took screenshots of every message, closed the laptop. When Jessica came downstairs, in the robe I had given her last Christmas, I was seated calmly at the kitchen island. "The good bath?" I asked. "Fine," she said cautiously, sensing something was off. "I've been thinking about the break you asked for," I said, my tone calm, "and I think you're right, we do need a change." Her face lit up. She probably expected a dramatic apology or a last-ditch gesture to win her back. "I think it's time we stop pretending," I continued. "You want to be with Ethan? Go be with him. You have until the end of the month to move out." Her expression shifted instantly. "Move out? This is my house too, and Lily stays with me. Actually, this house is in my name alone. I bought it before we got married. I have the deed. And as for Lily, that will be up to the courts. They'll decide who provides the stable home." Her jaw tightened. "No judge will take a child from her mother. You'll be lucky to get every other weekend." I smiled. A calm, measured smile that unnerved her more than yelling ever could. "You'd be surprised what judges think about mothers who neglect their children to have online affairs. I've documented everything, Jessica. Everything." For the first time I saw fear in her eyes, but it lasted only a second before defiance took its place. I stood there, holding her gaze, watching the flicker of fear vanish behind a wall of indignation. But something had shifted. She realized, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't going to play the role she had assigned me in her story. I wasn't the oblivious husband waiting on the sidelines while she found herself in another man's arms. I was taking control, and the realization unsettled her. Over the next few days, Jessica tried to oscillate between charm and coldness, like she couldn't decide if I was worth manipulating or discarding. She made a half-hearted attempt at being civil, cooked dinner one night, asked how my day was the next, but I saw it for what it was, a tactic, not remorse. Meanwhile, I continued to gather every record, every receipt, every screenshot. I organized the evidence into folders, digital and physical, prepared not just for court, but for truth. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was fighting for my daughter, for the right to protect her from a parent who saw responsibility as an obstacle to self-fulfillment. I met with Sarah again to review my options. She advised me to file first and request temporary primary custody. "Momentum matters in these cases," she said. "You've already shown stability. Filing first lets you frame the narrative." I nodded, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Purpose. At night, I kept journaling. I didn't write about Jessica anymore. Not much. I wrote about Lily, her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she squinted when she focused. I was building a new vision of my life, one that didn't include the chaos Jessica brought into our home. Later that evening, after Jessica stormed off in silence, I sat in the living room, with Lily nestled against my chest, her tiny fingers clutching my shirt as we watched her favorite cartoon. Her innocence was grounding. It reminded me of everything I was fighting for, not out of spite, but out of love and duty. This wasn't just about divorce. It was about making sure Lily grew up in a home where she was prioritized, not treated like an afterthought between phone calls. I tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stayed a few minutes longer just to watch her breathe. The peaceful rise and fall of her little chest gave me more clarity than any lawyer or therapist ever could. No matter what came next, I was ready. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared. "You're bluffing. You don't have anything," Jessica snapped, her eyes narrowing. Without a word, I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and showed her one of the screenshots. Her telling Ethan how she planned to minimize my parenting time so they could start fresh in Oregon. "There's plenty more where that came from," I said, "including security footage of you ignoring Lily's cries because you were too busy sexting." "You've been spying on me? In my own home?" she gasped. "My home," I corrected, "and yes. After discovering that my wife was planning to take our daughter across the country to move in with a stranger, I installed security cameras, perfectly legal, and they'll make very compelling material for the custody evaluator." Her demeanor shifted, her voice softened as she reached for my arm. "Mike, come on, we can fix this. I was just blowing off steam with Ethan. You know you and Lily are my world." I gently pulled away. "Save it, Jessica. I've seen the real you now, and honestly, I don't like her very much." She burst into tears, her face contorted in performative anguish. But I'd seen enough crocodile tears to know the difference between regret and regret at being caught. "What do you want from me?" she sobbed. "I want you to leave. Start your new life with Ethan or whoever else comes next. But Lily stays here, with the parent who puts her needs first. You can't do this to me. I'll fight you. I'll tell everyone you were a controlling monster." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "I've got the receipts, as the kids say. Every neglectful moment, every scheme is to use me for money. Every lie. It's all documented. If you want to air it out in court, be my guest." She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in weeks. The weight of indecision had finally lifted. The next few weeks were a storm of contradictions. One day she'd scream threats about taking me for everything I had. Next, she'd break down sobbing about how she still loved me and that Ethan was just a mistake. I stayed calm through it all, which only made her angrier. "Why aren't you fighting for me?" she demanded one day. "Because you're not worth fighting for anymore," I replied. "The woman I married wouldn't have done any of this." She tried turning our friends against me, spreading stories of emotional abuse and manipulation, but most saw through it, especially after I quietly showed them the truth. Even her own parents reached out. "We raised her better than this," her father said, clearly pained. "We don't know what's gotten into her, but we support you and Lily." True to my word, I filed for divorce and requested primary custody. Jessica was stunned when Sarah, my attorney, laid out the full scope of evidence, the security footage of her ignoring Lily's cries, screenshots of her messages to Ethan, even texts where she openly complained that motherhood was ruining her life. The judge's expression darkened as he flipped through the documents. "Mrs. Harris," he said, adjusting his glasses, "this court's primary concern is the well-being of the minor child. Your communications suggest a troubling disregard for your daughter's stability and emotional development." Jessica tried to fall back on the claim of postpartum depression and painted me as unsupportive, but the dates didn't align. Lily was over a year old when Jessica's affair began, and the documented evidence of my consistent involvement was undeniable. In the end, the judge awarded me primary physical custody. Jessica was granted supervised visitation until she could demonstrate emotional and parental stability. No alimony was awarded. Our marriage was too short, and she was able-bodied. Child support from her would be determined once she found employment. The day she moved out was oddly quiet. She looked hollow, drained, and surrounded by just a few boxes of personal items. I let her take whatever she wanted. Furniture, appliances. But she didn't want much. It wasn't the things she missed. It was the illusion. Ethan, the grand fantasy, had all but disappeared. His once daily messages dwindled into silence the moment the divorce became real. The prince of poetry had vanished when the possibility of a payout evaporated. Jessica stood in the living room, looking utterly lost. "Mike, please," she whispered, tears falling freely. "I made a huge mistake. I was just depressed after Lily and I lost ourselves. I'll delete the accounts. I'll go to therapy. I'll be the wife you deserve." "There's nothing to fix, Jessica," I said quietly. "I deserve someone who sees my hard work as love, not a means to an end." She sobbed harder. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "Your parents said you could stay with them while you get back on your feet. What you do from here, that's your decision. For the first time in a long time, you're free, and so is the responsibility." Then I picked up Lily, kissed her forehead, and walked away. She didn't try to stop me. Not anymore. After she left, the silence in the house was both strange and comforting. No tension in the air, no muffled arguments from the other room, no pretending, just Lily's laughter, the hum of daily life, and a weight slowly lifting off my chest. I got into a rhythm. Work in the morning, pick up Lily from my mom's or daycare in the afternoon, bedtime stories at night. I replaced the chaos with consistency. Meals were on time, routines were steady, and, more than anything, my daughter was thriving. Her vocabulary expanded, her laughter came easier, and bedtime became a joy instead of a battleground. Friends who had distanced themselves when things got messy began reaching out again. They saw I wasn't falling apart. I was standing taller than ever. They offered babysitting help, invited Lily and me to family barbecues, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. Even Dave, my lawyer friend, stopped by one weekend with his wife and kids. He pulled me aside at one point and said, "You did the right thing, Mike. You chose peace." And it showed. Jessica, for her part, faded into the background. She stuck to the supervised visitation schedule, though it was clear her heart wasn't in it. She'd show up late, leave early, and often spend more time texting than playing. I never said a word. I just logged everything quietly, as advised. One evening, as I was helping Lily build a block tower, she looked up at me with her big green eyes and said, Dad, happy." And she was right. I was. Not because the storm had passed, but because I had rebuilt my life with purpose, clarity, and love at its center. In the months that followed, life settled into something that resembled peace. I found myself smiling more, genuinely, not just for show. The quiet was no longer eerie, it was healing. I enrolled Lily in a preschool nearby and joined a weekend dad and daughter class that taught music basics. She loved banging on drums and trying to sing along, always a beat behind but with full conviction. I saw progress, not just in her but in myself. I reconnected with parts of who I was before the chaos, rediscovering music I'd long forgotten, rebuilding friendships, and for the first time, imagining a future that didn't feel like damage control. Every bedtime became a reminder of what mattered. Every tiny hand in mine reminded me of why I had fought so hard. And every morning, waking up to her smile, I knew I had made the right choice. We were going to be just fine. She left that day with her parents, who came to help her move. Both of them watched me with sad, apologetic eyes as they loaded her things into their SUV. I felt no joy in her distress, only a hollow relief that the worst was finally over. 2 months later, Jessica called me in tears. I almost didn't recognize her voice. She sounded broken. It turned out her fantasy romance had morphed into a nightmare. Despite her parents' pleas and my repeated warnings, she had begged them for a loan and drained the last of our emergency savings, nearly $3,000, 0 cents I had given her, to fly out and meet Ethan, convinced he was her soulmate. "Wasn't who he said he was, Mike," she sobbed. "As soon as I got there, he treated me like some woman he picked up online. He took all the money, said it was for our place, then disappeared for days. When he came back drunk and I confronted him, he laughed in my face. He said I was just a desperate housewife he'd been playing for kicks. Told all his friends I was easy and pathetic." Her voice cracked as she told me she had scraped together enough to rent a tiny apartment back in town, but she couldn't afford the second month's rent. Ethan had ghosted her completely. Her online support group had evaporated the moment she needed real help rather than echo chamber validation, and after a multi-year employment gap, the only jobs she could find didn't pay enough to live on. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," she wept. "I threw away everything good for a complete lie. Please, Mike, I know I don't deserve it, but can we try again? For Lily? For us? I'll do anything to make it right. I miss our family. I miss you." Part of me felt pity, an instinctive, human sympathy for someone in pain. But a larger part of me remembered everything, the mocking, the betrayal. Her plan was to take Lily away from me while living off the money I worked day and night to earn. That memory anchored me. "I'll help you find resources," I said, my voice firm. "For Lily's sake, I want her mother to be stable. But that's it. You made your choice, and choices have consequences." "You can't mean that," she whispered. "After everything we've been through?" "That's just it, Jess," I replied. "We've been through hell. But you're the one who dragged us there. I'm finally finding peace. Lily is thriving. I'm not risking that again." She broke down completely then, and though I felt a faint echo of the old affection, I didn't let it guide me. I had learned too much. Her tears, once so persuasive, no longer moved me the way they used to. "I can recommend some job placement services," I added gently. "And there's an apartment complex with low rent I can connect you to, but that's where my help ends." "I at least see Lily more," she pleaded. "The supervised visits feel so clinical." "Let's see how you do first," I replied, Lily needs consistency, not someone who might disappear again when the next Ethan comes along. That stung her, but it had to be said. Trust is built with consistency, not apologies. Today, I have Lily about 80% of the time. I've scaled back my hours and promoted Tim, my loyal foreman, to junior partner. It's freed me to be present with my daughter. I converted the home office into a playroom, complete with a reading nook, an art corner, and a stuffed animal zoo she calls Lily's Jungle. Jessica is slowly rebuilding. She has a part-time retail job and sees a therapist regularly. She visits Lily with more regularity now. And though our interactions are cordial, sometimes even friendly, there's a wall that will never come down. She made sure of that. As for me, I've started seeing someone. Claire, a pediatric nurse I met at one of Lily's checkups, is everything Jessica pretended to be. She values the life I've built, not the fantasy. It doesn't match. She listens, really listens, even if I'm just talking about cement density or subcontractor drama. The first time she came over for dinner, she saw my woodworking station in the garage and asked thoughtful questions about the coffee table I was making. Jessica had once scoffed at that same hobby, calling it boring and a waste of time. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't hurting someone back, it's thriving. It's building a life so full of peace, love, and meaning that it becomes a monument to everything they threw away. In the quiet moments after our calls ended, I often found myself reflecting, not on what I'd lost, but on what I'd learned. I had weathered betrayal, heartbreak, and the collapse of a marriage I once believed unshakable. Yet here I stood, more grounded than ever. Life had taught me not just who I was, but who I refused to be again. I would never again accept love that came with conditions, or affection that vanished the moment life grew difficult. Lily reminded me daily of what mattered most, her tiny arms around my neck, her bedtime giggles, even the endless trail of toys across the living room floor. All of it was worth more than any apology Jessica could offer. I found strength in my routines, in the small victories of parenthood. From teaching Lily how to tie her shoes to attending her first dance recital, I discovered joy in the present. And for the first time in years, I was looking ahead with hope. Claire and I weren't rushing things. We moved slowly, deliberately. She understood what I had been through and respected the time I needed to heal. Her kindness was steady, not performative or strategic, just genuine. She would bring Lily small gifts, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful little items like a handmade bracelet or a coloring book she picked up during a grocery run. It wasn't flashy, but it was real, and after years of illusions, reality was the most beautiful thing of all. I often think back to that night in the kitchen, the night I told Jessica it was over. I remember the clarity, the stillness, and the resolve. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was love. Love for my daughter, for our future, and for myself. In the end, I didn't just rebuild my life. I reclaimed it.